Corporations everywhere are feeling the urgency around environmental, social, and governance compliance planning. Climate change and achieving net zero emissions have dominated the conversation to date, driven in part by evolving regulation in jurisdictions around the world. But this is only a very small part of a complete ESG compliance plan. More and more investors are looking to do business with companies that value all-encompassing, socially responsible practices. Issues like managing waste streams, sustainability, vendor liabilities, and human rights all need to be considered. Building organizational planning and policies custom to your company is no small undertaking. When you create an ESG policy, you want to adopt practices that enable you to meet the needs of your stakeholders. This starts by asking, who are they? How are they impacted? And how do we get their input to better understand their risks? In order for any ESG-related policies to be fit for purpose and ultimately embedded in operational practices, they must be collaboratively drafted with input from all levels and across all relevant functions within an organization. Varying individuals and departments within your organization will be impacted differently by this policy. Therefore, you need a wide breadth of input and perspectives. Stakeholder input shouldn't be limited solely to people within your company. Consult with local community members, subject matter experts on a particular topic, local government representatives, your customers, and suppliers. They all have something to gain or lose based on the success of your ESG practices and strategies. Additionally, an assessment of your peer companies and customer requirements will provide insight. When drafting a policy or a code related to human rights, for example, be sure that your policy doesn't fall short or is less stringent than that of your customers. You should take care to align your policies with the range of customer requirements, industry standards, best practices, and the laws and jurisdictions of where you operate. Different jurisdictions where your value chain operates around the world come with different risks, legal regimes, and cultural practices. The same is true for specific sectors, products, materials, or processes. Each comes with their own inherent risks, impacts, and opportunities. If you're not accounting for the unique nature of how your business or your business partners operate around the world, then you're limiting your scope of view and potentially setting yourself up for failure. Instead, look at your business and value chain through a variety of lenses. Like, where do I operate? What's the local context in which I operate? What are the local regulatory requirements? How will my business operate within the constraints of this environment? How will I source materials? What are the labor considerations? For example, where is there a prevalence of forced labor, child labor, or workplace exploitation? And what are the local business practices, the environmental risks, or future climate-related risks? For example, if you or your business partners operate a water-intensive process or a site in a water-stressed region, how do you account for your impacts and minimize those that are harmful to the community or the local environment? Without answers to these questions, you're setting yourself up for potential risk and financial loss. Think not only from a geographic perspective, but from a temporal perspective. How will my business activities today impact my stakeholders in 5 or 10 years' time? Although this type of reflection and research is absolutely necessary, the development and adoption of ESG policies will fail without a strong commitment from leadership. The policy itself is simply a starting point that must be supported by an effective management system in order to become embedded into day-to-day company practices. A mature and responsive management system should provide clear guidance to managers and staff. It should enable cross-functional communication and submission of grievances when workers identify that policies are not being upheld. It should train managers and workers on the policy requirements, particularly in complex areas that significantly impact the business. It should establish KPIs and goals and monitor against compliance, reflect worker sentiment or other relevant metrics. It should assess the impact to the workforce, the community, or the business over time. It should align incentives against program objectives and evaluate individuals and functions against those goals. It needs to communicate measurements to leadership and impacted stakeholders. And it should also establish a means to make changes that drive continuous improvement based on this ongoing monitoring. By approaching this type of diagnosis and planning as a potentially transformational opportunity, and not solely as a checkbox reporting exercise, you enable your organization to widen the lens of what's possible, to see around corners, and to engage your stakeholders in a way that improves relationships, builds resilience, and creates value.
There is always a risk that ESG can remain conceptual or theoretical, but our thanks to Ryan Lynch, the Practice Director for Sustainability at BSI Consulting, for sharing these practical ways in which in-house counsel and other stakeholders can take action with our ESG Academy audience. For more information about how ESG impacts your business, visit us at hoganlovells.com/ESG Academy.